October 17th, 1973, Kuwait City. The oil ministers of the Arab world sit around a table and make a decision that will bring the most powerful economy on earth to its knees without a single soldier crossing a border. They agree to cut oil production and to cut off the United States entirely. Within weeks, the effect is catastrophic. The price of oil quadruples, from $3 a barrel to $12. In America, gas stations run dry. Cars line up for half a mile, waiting hours to fill a tank. Rationing returns. Factories slow. The stock market loses nearly half its value. For the first time, Americans understand something that had never occurred to them before. They are not in control of the thing their entire economy runs on. But here is what almost nobody remembers about how this ended, because the embargo itself lasted only 5 months. What replaced it was far more important and far more permanent. Out of that crisis, America engineered a deal, a secret, elegant arrangement with Saudi Arabia that would anchor American power for the next 50 years. Saudi Arabia would price all its oil in dollars, only dollars, and in return, America would protect the kingdom. Every nation on earth that needed oil now needed dollars to buy it. The petrodollar was born. And it turned the dollar into something no currency had ever been. I've spent months studying this arrangement, how it was built, and more importantly, how it is now quietly coming apart. Because in 2023, Saudi Arabia began accepting yuan for oil sales to China. The exact arrangement that made the dollar king is being unwound, deal by deal, quietly. Just like 1973, except this time America is on the wrong side of the table. Stay with me. Here is what most people get wrong about the 1973 oil crisis. They remember the gas lines, the rationing, the shock. They treat it as a temporary emergency, a bad few months in the 1970s that eventually passed. And the crisis itself did pass, but treating it as a temporary event completely misses the permanent structure that emerged from it, a structure that has quietly underwritten American power for half a century. Because the real story of 1973 is not the embargo, it is what America built to make sure it could never happen again. Let me show you exactly how it worked. By the early 1970s, the dollar was in trouble. In 1971, as I've covered before, Nixon had severed the dollar's link to gold. For the first time, the world's reserve currency was backed by nothing but trust in the United States government. And trust on its own is a fragile foundation for global monetary dominance. The dollar needed a new anchor, something real, something the entire world needed and could not do without. Oil was the answer. Here's why oil was the perfect anchor. Unlike gold, whose supply was fixed and whose price constrained the money supply, oil was consumed constantly and universally. Every factory, every truck, every power plant, every military on earth ran on it. Demand for oil was not just large, it was permanent and growing. If you could tie the dollar to oil, you would tie it to the beating heart of the entire industrial economy. And unlike gold, there would be no vault that could run empty, no convertibility promise that could be broken. The demand would renew itself every single day the world kept moving. After the embargo ended in 1974, American officials, led by Henry Kissinger and the Treasury, negotiated a landmark arrangement with Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter. The terms were straightforward and world-changing. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil exclusively in US dollars. It would take the enormous dollar revenues it earned and reinvest a large share of them into US Treasury bonds. And in exchange, the United States would provide military protection and security guarantees to the Saudi kingdom. This was the birth of the petrodollar system, and its genius was structural. Think about what it accomplished. Every country on earth needs oil. After this arrangement, buying oil meant acquiring dollars first. Japan needed dollars to buy Saudi oil. Germany needed dollars. India, Brazil, South Korea, every industrializing nation needed to hold dollar reserves simply to keep their economies running. The demand for dollars was no longer dependent on American exports or American gold. It was welded to the single most essential commodity in the industrial world. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by oil, or more precisely by the global necessity of using dollars to buy oil. And that necessity created permanent, structural, worldwide demand for American currency. Here's the critical part. This system did something extraordinary for the United States. It allowed America to run enormous deficits without the consequences that would destroy any other country. Because the world needed dollars to buy oil, the world was willing to hold dollars and dollar-denominated debt. America could print, borrow, and spend on a scale no other nation could match, and the petrodollar system absorbed it. The oil-backed demand for dollars was the pressure valve that made American fiscal excess sustainable for 50 years. The petrodollar was not just an economic arrangement, it was the financial foundation of American superpower status. Now, here is 2026, and I want you to watch the foundation crack. In 2023, Saudi Arabia began accepting Chinese yuan for oil sales to China. Let me be precise about why this matters, because it is easy to underestimate. In isolation, a single yuan-denominated oil deal is small. It does not end the dollar. It does not end the petrodollar system overnight, but it breaks the exclusivity, and exclusivity was the entire point. The petrodollar system worked because oil was priced in dollars, only dollars, everywhere, without exception. The moment a major producer prices even part of its oil in another currency, the only dollars foundation cracks. And once it cracks, the crack tends to widen, because every country watching now knows that an alternative is not just theoretical, it is operational. And this is not happening in isolation. Watch the pattern. The 2022 freezing of Russia's dollar reserves accelerated everything. When Western governments froze roughly $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves overnight, every non-Western nation received a permanent lesson. Dollar reserves are not truly yours. They are a claim that can be revoked the moment you fall out of favor. For any country that could imagine ever being on the wrong side of Washington, holding oil revenues in dollars suddenly looked less like prudence and more like exposure. Russia now settles the majority of its energy trade with China in yuan and rubles rather than dollars. India has been buying discounted Russian oil and exploring settlement in rupees and other currencies. China has established yuan-denominated oil futures contracts in Shanghai, a direct alternative to the dollar-based oil pricing that has dominated for 50 years. The BRICS nations have openly discussed reducing dollar dependency in trade. None of these individually ends the petrodollar. Together they represent the systematic dismantling of the exclusivity that made it powerful. Here's the part that makes this genuinely dangerous for the United States. Remember what the petrodollar actually did. It created permanent global demand for dollars, which allowed America to run massive deficits without consequence. Now run that logic in reverse. America's national debt is $36 trillion. Its annual deficit runs at approximately $2 trillion. Interest payments have crossed $1 trillion per year. For 50 years, the petrodollar system has helped ensure that the world absorbed America's debt issuance, because the world needed dollars anyway, so holding dollar assets was natural. But if the structural oil-backed demand for dollars weakens, if buying oil no longer requires dollars the way it once did, then one of the great pillars supporting American debt begins to erode. The world's willingness to hold dollars and dollar debt was never purely about faith in America. It was substantially about necessity. Remove the necessity, and faith has to carry a much heavier load. At exactly the moment when America's fiscal position gives the world more reason for doubt, not less. This is the trap closing in the opposite direction from 1973. In 1973, the Arab states demonstrated that whoever controls the flow of oil controls a decisive lever over the global economy. America absorbed that lesson and turned it into an advantage by ensuring that oil would flow through dollars, and thus that controlling the currency of oil meant controlling a lever over everyone else. Now that lever is being taken back, not through an embargo, not through a dramatic crisis with gas lines and rationing, through something far quieter and far harder to reverse. The slow, deliberate construction of alternatives, when oil contracts, bilateral energy deals, currency swap agreements, each one small, each one reversible in isolation. Together, a structural shift in the foundation of dollar dominance. Here is what 1973 teaches us about how these shifts actually unfold. The embargo was sudden and visible. Everyone saw it, everyone felt it. And precisely because it was so visible, America was able to respond, to engineer the petrodollar arrangement that turned a crisis into 50 years of dominance. The current shift is the opposite. It is gradual and nearly invisible. There is no single dramatic moment, no gas lines, no televised address, just a steady accumulation of deals, each one too small to make headlines, that together are unwinding the exact structure the 1973 response created. And because there is no dramatic moment, there is no obvious point at which America mobilizes a response. The frog does not notice the water warming. America is not being attacked the way it was in 1973. It is watching the foundation it built in response to 1973 be quietly disassembled, and it has not yet formulated a response because the disassembly does not look like a crisis. It looks like a series of ordinary business decisions. The Arab oil ministers in 1973 understood that oil was leverage. America understood it too and built the petrodollar to seize that leverage for itself. The question now is whether America understands that the leverage is being taken back, one quiet yuan-denominated barrel at a time, while there is still time to respond. Saudi Arabia priced oil in dollars for 50 years because America made it worth their while. In 2023, they started pricing some of it in yuan. That single decision is the 1973 oil ministers meeting running in reverse. And this time, America is the one watching its economy's foundation get decided in a room it does not control. Subscribe if you want to keep following this, because I'm tracking the exact mechanisms connecting what the Arab states did in 1973 to what is happening to the petrodollar right now. And I want your argument in the comments. The petrodollar gave America 50 years of deficits without consequence. If oil no longer requires dollars, does that pillar collapse quickly, or does the dollar's momentum carry it for another generation regardless? And what would America even do to stop it? Drop your answer below. The clearest argument gets pinned.